What's up guys, Asian here again with another theory crafting video, and today we're going to be discussing status effects, elemental status effects, what they are, how you can apply them, and why they are so important in group content. So just starting things off, you have 5 elemental types, so to speak, in ESO. You have flame damage, you have shock damage, frost damage, poison damage, and disease damage. Now the first 3, flame, shock, and frost, are all scaled off of magicka, so it's based off your spell damage, your max magicka, things like that. While poison and disease, on the other hand, are scaled by your physical damage, so your weapon damage, your max stamina, things like that. So that's why you won't see stamina DPS used, for example, a shock enchant, because shock would scale to your magicka rather than your stamina. So stamina DPS would be better off running a poison or disease enchant versus any of the 3 other elemental types. Now each of these elemental types of damage are capable of inflicting their respective status effects. So just going down the list, flame damage has the possibility of inflicting burning as a status effect. Burning is a dot. It is a 4-second long dot. So that ticks for 3 seconds, once every second, along with the initial hit. But the burning status effect itself only ticks for three times. And it is considered a dot, so it will proc things like Scoria, and it will proc things that are considered flame damage, so it will proc the flame damage part of Lambris. So that's burning. Shock damage will proc Concussed. Under combat metrics and seemingly in the game code, Concussed is also known as minor vulnerability, so it increases the damage that the enemy takes by 8%, so it's a fairly powerful debuff there. Just like burning, it is a 4-second duration, so it will last 4 seconds from when it is applied. So Concussed is also required in order to set an enemy off balance. If the enemy is not concussed, then Lightning Wall will not actually set the enemy off balance. So Concussed is a very, very important status effect in group content because of the strength of off balance in this current meta. Frost damage will deal chilled, is the status effect, which is also known as minor maim in combat metrics as well as the in-game code. Minor maim will decrease the damage dealt to you by the boss by 15%, so it is a pretty strong debuff. However, minor maim is also applied by other moves and other sets as well, most notably Heroic Slash, which your tank will almost certainly be using and keeping up on the boss for that ultimate regen. So chilled by itself is not a, a preferable status effect to inflict on the enemy. It does last for 4 seconds, just because the tank will have Heroic Slash, which also deals minor maim, so it's an easier source to get minor maim as well as a longer duration. So frost staves do have a place in PvP though, because minor maim, even though there are other sources and other ways to apply minor maim, frost damage, just because you have things like destructive reach and the blockade of elements, things like that, it's easier to apply that to enemies compared to some of the other abilities or other sets that also apply minor maim. Poison damage will inflict, as you can reasonably expect, the poison status effect. Just like burning, it is a 4-second dot with 3 ticks along with the initial tick when it hits, so it deals poison damage, so anything that requires or procs off of poison damage will also be affected, will be activated by poison, so things like Morak Tong, for instance, will deal an extra 10% damage to your poison status effect as well. So basically poison is more or less the physical damage version of burning. And then disease damage will inflict minor defile. Minor defile will decrease the amount of healing the enemy receives by 15%. In PvE, this is pretty much a useless debuff because bosses generally don't heal themselves, except for certain exceptions, and even at that point, the amount of healing and the amount of health that they do, even with the 50% reduction, isn't actually all that much in the grand scheme of things, so you won't really see disease damage being used in PvE. However, in PvP, Defiled, both major and minor, are very, very powerful debuffs, so you may see some builds run disease glyphs for PvP, because the minor Defiled is a very powerful debuff to apply on the enemy. It reduces the amount of healing they receive, so you're able to kill them and burst them down faster without fear of them getting Breath of Life back up to 100% or 60% health or whatever have you. So it just makes it easier to burst down the enemy that way. Now, the different elemental damage types do not have a 100% possibility of applying their respective elemental effect. They are probability based, and depending on what ability you use, it will determine the probability of the status effect being applied. So just starting things off here, the highest probability comes from your weapon damage enchant. So charged weapon, fiery weapon, poisoned weapon, things like that. So whatever enchant you have, the base percentage is going to be a 20% chance to apply their respective status effect. So in this case, I have a shock damage enchant on my front bar, which means I have a 20% chance of applying Concussed whenever the shock damage enchant procs. You can change this with the charged. You can change actually all these following percentages using a charge trait, which increases the probability of, or the chance of applying status effects by 220%. So basically just multiply it by 3.2, and then that's your probability of applying the status effect with a charged, at least two-hand weapon. If you're using dual wield, it's going to be 110 per weapon that you have. Of course, this is a legendary status. So for the shock damage enchant, for instance, here without charged, I have a 20% chance whenever it procs. With charged, I have a 64% chance of applying Concussed when it procs. So that's the best way to apply these status effects, using a elemental damage enchant. Now the next way to do it is what Zos calls standard abilities. In other words, these are abilities that deal direct damage. The classic example that I can give you guys is going to be Crushing Shock. Because it is a direct damage hit, it deals flame, frost, and shock damage all in one go. So it does have a 10% chance of applying burning, concussed, or chilled. This is, of course, ignoring things like the Asylum Staff. So this is the next best way to apply your status effects with a direct damage ability. So this is a 10% chance base. With charge, it bumps it up to 32% chance. And now we're going to move on to the next highest, and these are starting to get pretty low. So the next one is going to be a damage over time single target effect. So the example that I have here is going to be Destructive Clench or Destructive Reach for Magicka users. For Stamina users, it's going to be something like Poison Arrow, Poison Injection, or Venom Injection. So these are single target dots, so you can only apply them to one enemy, and these have a 5% chance of inflicting their corresponding status effects. So if you have, for example, Destructive Clench on a shock bar, you have a 5% chance every time the dot ticks to apply Concussed. With a charged staff, of course, this increases up to 16% chance. Going further down the line, and we're going to be going to even smaller percentages now, it's going to be area of effect abilities with one hit, so it's not going to be a dot. So the classic example for this is going to be Impulse. It is an area of effect ability, but it only deals a single tick of damage. So this has a 3% chance of applying your status effect corresponding to the elemental type. So if you have, for instance, Impulse on a lightning staff, you have a 3% chance for each enemy hit to apply the concussed status effect, and of course with the charge trait it jumps up to 9%. And finally you have a multi-target damage over time effect. So the classic example for this is going to be Elemental Blockade. An example for stamina users would be something like Acid Spray. So these have both an area of effect and damage over time component behind it. So these have the lowest chance of proccing your status effect. The base chance is 1%. With charge, it jumps up to about 3% chance. So Elemental Blockade, if you use it down with a lightning staff, you have a 1% chance base to inflict concussed and consecutively off balance at the same time. So yes, that's pretty much how you can apply status effects. Now, I haven't talked about light and heavy attacks, and that's because they actually do not have a chance to apply their corresponding status effects for destruction staves. If there is a chance, it is incredibly low. So just to show you guys as proof, I spent about 6 minutes just light attack spamming a target skeleton, and I see here in comment metrics, I hit it 435 times with a lightning staff light attack. You can see here though, you do not see minor vulnerability anywhere on the debuffs out list. So if light attacks and heavy attacks do in fact apply their elemental effect, it is at such a low probability that on your standard boss parse, on a standard dummy parse, you're not going to see any difference at all in your status effect uptimes like concuss and things like that. Um, so that's kind of why light attacks and heavy attacks aren't really talked about, because they don't actually have a chance to apply their status effects, unless of course you're talking about the weapon damage enchant, but that is not at all correlated with the light and heavy attacks. Light and heavy attacks by themselves don't have any chance of applying their status effects whatsoever. So other ways you can apply status effects, you can actually apply them using monster helm effects. So let me see, pull up Lambrus real quick. So Lambrus, you can see here, will deal flame or shock damage to all enemies within 4 meters every 1 second for 5 seconds. So yes, monster helms can proc these status effects corresponding to their respective elements. However, they will inherit the probability based on how their effects are defined. So for example, Lambrus is an area of effect with a damage over time component, so it has a 1% chance to apply either concussed or burning depending on which proc you have. Same thing with Grothar. Grothar has a 1% chance of applying burning because it is a area of effect with a damage over time component behind it. Veladreth, on the other hand, has a 10% chance of inflicting minor defile because it is a single hit of disease damage. Even though there are 3 spores, it doesn't actually count as an area of effect ability, it just counts as a single direct damage hit. So that's pretty much it for status effects. If you guys are interested in how Concussed relates to off balance, please check out my off balance video. I go over off balance and Concussed, their relationship there in depth in that video. So if you have any more questions about Concussed, if you would like to see an actual video of me basically light attack or heavy attack spamming dummies to show you guys that that the light and heavy attacks actually don't apply concussed or burning, please let me know down in the comments. It will be a very boring video, but if you guys want to see that as a video evidence, then I will be more than happy to do that for you guys. So hope you guys found this video informative. I will see you guys in the next dungeon.